Marina Weiler is working with CUSAC currently in an initiative. She'll be talking a little bit about it today. So, Marina Weiler has been working with us, and we're super excited about the concept of non-local perception. And we're doing some mind site research with her. So Marina Weiler, she's going to be talking about beyond the ordinary, testing the limits of perception and consciousness. Dr. Marina Weiler is a Brazilian neuroscientist specializing in memory, cognition, and altered states of consciousness. Affiliated with the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, she investigates out-of-body experiences, telepathy, and mediumship using advanced neuroimaging. Her work examines the relationship between brain activity and subjective experience, contributing to evolving models of consciousness. Welcome to the stage, Marina. We're super grateful to have you, and we're super grateful to get the chance to work with you.
Thank you, Stacy. It's an honor to be here. I might be less than 10 minutes, so let's see. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So, as Stacy said, I am an assistant professor at the Division of Perceptual Studies, DOPS, how we call, at University of Virginia School of Medicine. And I will give you a little bit of my, let me just move this, a little bit about my background and how I ended up here doing this research at DOPS and now collaborating with CUSAC too. I actually started my career in a very traditional place in neuroscience. So my experiences in neuroscience during my PhD at the University of Campinas in Brazil, I was working with dementia patients, trying to understand Alzheimer's disease. I would meet with patients, recruit them into studies, collect MRI scans, and then analyze how changes in brain networks related to their cognitive decline. At the same time, my goal was very clear. I wanted to find objective biomarkers of disease in the brain. Then in 2016, I moved to the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute on Aging, NIA, where I shifted from observation to intervention. And I began working with transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, which is a non-invasive brain stimulation technique. And I wanted to see whether we could actually improve memory in aging. I was using animal models at the time. And what truly fascinated me in those 4 years working at NIH was not only to see whether memory improved or not after we stimulated the brain, but to see what was happening at the level of genes and proteins that could explain those changes. So I was doing that type of analysis too. A few years later at UCLA, 2020, I went back to MRI, to neuroimaging, but with a different question. I was working with patients who had experienced traumatic brain injury, trying to predict something very concrete as a research question: who would develop epilepsy in the years following the injury? Because we know it's a common effect of traumatic brain injury is developing epilepsy. So the focus was on extracting reliable signals from the brain to predict outcomes. And across all of these stages, there was a common thread. How do we detect meaningful signals in the brain and link them to cognition and behavior? Then in 2023, I made what might seem like a very unexpected shift. I joined the University of Virginia in the Division of Perceptual Studies, where we study extraordinary and anomalous human experiences. So these are experiences that don't fit neatly within our current scientific models, which are largely grounded in physicalism. And interestingly, I realized that I hadn't actually left my previous work behind. I was still asking the same fundamental question, but in a very different context here. So now, instead of studying memory decline or brain injury, I'm investigating experiences like out-of-body experiences, mediumship, and more recently, telepathy in non-speaking autistic individuals. But the core question remains the same. How do we detect reliable signals of cognition, especially when they don't fit our usual expectations of how the mind should work? I'm sorry. So after moving to UVA, my work expanded into the scientific study of perception beyond the traditional sensory framework, so extrasensory perception. And importantly, we don't approach this as a single phenomenon. We approach it as a spectrum of questions about how information can be accessed and represented. On one end, I study lab-controlled veridical perception, where we test whether individuals can accurately perceive information under strictly controlled experimental conditions, putting a target in a different room. On the other hand, I also study spontaneous veridical experiences. So, for example, cases where people report perceiving real events during out-of-body experiences, which we can then try to verify through independent evidence, interviewing witnesses, for example, or a third person. I also investigate more complex forms of information expression, such as stylistic and thematic analysis of mediumistic writing, like the work associated with Chico Xavier, a very famous medium that lived in Brazil. He died over 20 years ago, asking whether there are identifiable patterns that go beyond chance or imitation. So right now we are conducting a study. This is a collaboration with a good friend in Brazil, that we compare the mediumistic work of Chico Xavier with the work produced by the same authors during when they were alive. And in parallel, as I mentioned before, I'm also developing controlled behavioral paradigms, including eye tracking studies in non-speaking autistic individuals. I'm sure everyone's heard about the telepathy tapes here, to test whether meaningful information can be extracted even when motor output is limited. And in addition to these controlled experiments, I'm also conducting interviews with therapists, parents, caregivers, and the non-speakers themselves to understand how these anomalous experiences unfold. And we have a wonderful research team here. I want to thank Marjorie, Diane, and everyone who is involved in this research proposal. But there's another phenomenon that seems worth studying too, which is mind sight. And mind sight refers to the reported ability to perceive visual information, such as colors, shapes, or even the environment, without using the eyes. There are anecdotal reports across cultures, including in blind individuals who can mind see, but scientifically, the phenomenon has never been tested under rigorous and controlled conditions. So the question that I'll be answering in collaboration with CUSAC is very simple. Is there any measurable signal here? And if so, what kind of perception are we dealing with? We will start with a behavioral verification under strictly controlled conditions. Participants will be asked to identify targets, such as color, numbers, placed inside either sealed containers, or they'll be using blindfolds. We will eliminate all possible sensory leakage, no visual cues, no reflections, no subtle signaling. We also be working with an illusionist to make sure there is no peeking. And at the same time, we are going to take a participant-informed approach, because many individuals report that their performance depends on specific internal states or conditions. So we are going to collaborate with the participants to optimize how they engage in the task. And participants who show consistent above chance performance will move to the second phase, which will emphasize understanding the experience itself. We are going to use structural phenomenological interviews immediately after each session to capture how the participants experience mind sight and how they are acquiring the information. So even when performance looks similar, the underlying experience might be fundamentally different. And in the next phase, this is a potential next phase, selected participants will undergo functional MRI and explore the neural correlates of mind sight. And at this stage here, the question shifts from whether the effect exists to how it might be implemented in the brain. We are going to examine whether the activity resembles visual processing, multisensory integration, or a different network altogether. And critically, we'll interpret these neural patterns in light of the reported experience. So we're going to be linking what the participants say during the interviews with the signal that we are going to be recording from MRI scanning. So the study is structured in layers. First, we're going to establish whether there is a real signal, and then we attempt to explain it. So why study mindsight? One, because it directly challenges some of our most basic assumptions about perception. In neuroscience, perception is typically understood as a process that depends on sensory input, like vision, which means light entering the eyes being processed by the visual system. If individuals can access visual-like information without that pathway, it forces us to reconsider how perception is constructed in the brain. Is also important because it has implications for visual science and neuroplasticity. For example, in blind individuals, the visual cortex can be repurposed for non-visual functions. Mindsight provides a unique test case for whether visual-like experience can emerge without retinal input, possibly through alternative pathways or reorganized networks. And lastly, at a broader level, this work speaks to the question in consciousness research, not just about perception, but about the underlying framework we use to study it. We all know that current models of reality largely assume that perception is constructed in the brain. However, if that assumption is incomplete, even in rare cases, it suggests that our current paradigm may not fully capture the range of human perceptual experience. So the implication is just not only about explaining an unusual phenomenon, but it's about testing the limits of our current paradigm of perception and reality itself. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Marina. We're super excited to work with you on this. It really is changing the way that we think about the nature of reality and perception.